We're happy to have you. Again, I'm Casey D'Amato, president of Certified PA Consulting. And we are a consulting firm that's been around since 2009. For those of you that maybe don't know, we are a team of expert PAs that have varying business backgrounds. So everything from managing multi-million-dollar practices to owning our own practices like Catherine here today, to being experts in salary negotiations, making career transitions, certified life and career coaches, and everything in between. So we host these sessions once a month that you can join totally free. And we are recording them. And we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the commonly asked questions that come up about PA practice ownership. We're going to be talking about that tonight. We're going to talk for about 10 minutes or so we can cover some highlights. Feel free to write questions in the chat. And after we finish kind of covering some of the most commonly asked questions, we're going to open it up and we'll start answering your questions. You can come off mute and you can ask and we can have some dialogue about PA practice ownership. So without further ado, I'm very excited to have Catherine Warner here. If you, hopefully you know her. She is a PA extraordinaire and has owned her own practice for, oh my gosh, like what, 3 or 4 years already now, right?
I'm at 5 now.
5 years.
And that's,
I
yeah.
was thinking it might already be that much. So Catherine is an expert in PA practice ownership without a doubt. And she is our lead consultant when it comes to PAs who want to start their own practice. And she's helped quite a few PAs get up and running in just a matter of a few months and already start seeing their own patients. So she is a great resource to ask questions. You can schedule a private session with her one-on-one and dive deep into your personal situation. And she also teaches a program called Practice Building Blueprint, which is a 4-month program and goes through all the nuts and bolts step by step, from the legal requirements, regulatory, to marketing, to all the different things, forecasting, how to figure out if your business model is viable. So everything that you need, she is your resource if you're thinking about starting a practice. So we're going to talk through some commonly asked questions here tonight. And a lot of people think that starting a practice is really overwhelming, really complicated. It's going to be this huge venture, and it can be if you make it that way, but it doesn't have to be. And Catherine really breaks down how to start your practice in a simple way, and ways that you can get going without a lot of time, money, and red tape. And so the first question I want to kick it off with Catherine is, what is the bare minimum? Like if you just had to list kind of the top like 5 or 6 things that you truly need, what is the bare minimum just to get started in opening up your own practice?
Yeah, I'm really, we the bare minimum is like what's going to be legal, and what's going to make sense for the IRS. So we definitely want to go ahead and get a corporate structure, which everybody gets like, oh goodness, that's going to be so hard. In most states, you go to a website, you fill out some information and pay your money. It's in most states not very tricky. We're going to need a tax ID, which again, IRS, fill out a form. I mean, you can get both of those knocked out in an hour if you know where to look. We want to get a mailing address because all those places are going to start sending you paperwork. Then you want to make sure you can get it. You could use your home address, but I personally don't want my home address, blasted on the internet for everybody. You're going to want a bank account separate, from your personal account, so that you can keep all your accounting and funds pretty easy to track. You'll definitely want to get a phone number. And again, starting out, that can be like a Google number. It doesn't have to be anything, a Skype number. It doesn't have to be anything expensive or complicated. I mean, again, theoretically, you could run it to your personal cell phone, but for $5 a month, separating it is totally worth it. You want a video platform or an office. You need some way to like interact with people. Nowadays with telehealth, you can get a video platform and start seeing patients with very low overhead. Then we kind of think about practice stuff, medical practice things. So if you're in a state that requires a supervising physician, which, most still do, we're going to need a supervising physician, a physician agreement, or a supervision collaboration agreement, whatever it's called in your state. We obviously need our medical licenses, any requirements from the Board of Pharmacy in your state, or if you're doing controlled substances, your DEA, the normal stuff to practice, and then malpractice insurance. I mean, that's really it that you absolutely have to have to get going.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great summary. And I'll just kind of reiterate in case anybody wants to jot those down of what the points that Catherine said, which was your structure, your corporate structure, your tax ID, mailing address, phone number, what platform or office, what's your physical, how are you going to actually see the patients, supervising physician, supervising agreement, and malpractice insurance. And one follow-up question that comes to mind for me, if you have all these things pretty organized, how long, or I guess I should say, how fast could you take that list and check all those things off and be ready to go? Like if you just looked at those things alone that we just talked about, how quickly can you get all those things in place?
I maybe, other than this board of medicine, so if we take the board of medicine out of it because they run on their own time and that's completely state dependent, a couple of hours really. I mean, you can get a corporate structure, tax ID, mailing list, phone number, bank account, and even malpractice insurance within a couple of hours. None of those are complicated processes. And I think especially if you know where to look. And so that's one thing in our program, or if we work together, that I kind of, well, in the program materials, I've got links to all of those things. You click it, you fill it out, you click on the next one, fill it out. So again, a couple of hours and you could bust out all those things. Now I say that as somebody who's already done it multiple times, but gosh, I mean, I think it shouldn't really take you that long.
Yeah.
Especially, what corporate structure. Now, if you're in a state that's got wonky laws about PA practice ownership, that part of it, but like the actual process is not complicated at all. It's all pretty simple.
That's why I really wanted to call that out, because even though that list might sound overwhelming to some people and like, where do you start? It's really not as hard as you think. It's a
Oh,
couple
not at
hours
all.
of effort. And even with some of the regulatory or setting it up, if you had to work around the laws, you might be working with an attorney for a couple of weeks. But we're talking about, hours, or over a period of time of a couple back and forth with an attorney or something like that over a span of a couple weeks. So this is, I just wanted to reiterate so that anybody who's listening or maybe watching this on a replay and they're, thinking that it's overwhelming, that it's not as overwhelming as most people think to get started. I mean, this can really be done if you have the right people guiding you through the process. That's why Catherine does what she does, because she's so good at it and she's an expert in 5 years in her practice, and she's helped so many other PAs get up and running, and NPs. It's the same process essentially, a few nuances to the laws, but it can be done relatively quickly and without a lot of overwhelm. So I think a lot of people are afraid of the process part of it, and that it will be overwhelming and cumbersome. And it definitely does not have to be. And this is really where leaning on the right resources. If you know how to do all these things, you can do them yourself in a few hours. And if you don't, that's why we're here. That's why Catherine is here, and you can chat with her. And tonight here, obviously there's no cost or anything like that. And if you want a deeper dive into your situation, we can get that set up for you. What about EHR, right? Like EHR, like that's a big topic that people are worried about. Number one, they're cumbersome, they slow us down, they're expensive. We've got HIPAA to worry about. So what are your feelings around EHR when you get started? Do you need it, not need it? Where do you start with the EHR
Yeah, I
situation?
mean, realistically, there's no law saying you have to have an EHR. Now you have to protect the information, but that could be a lockbox, a locked file cabinet in your office. It doesn't, I mean, we existed on paper forever. And that's still perfectly legal. It's inexpensive. It's easy if you're like me, and that's where you're used to, like where you started. Um, I know people who use Google Docs. If you have a paid HIPAA compliant with a BAH agreement, then you can use Google Docs and keep, just a narrative of what was done each visit. Again, totally legal. And then call in the prescriptions on the phone. That works. When I first started, I didn't want to pay for a prescription program, so I just called everything in. Now I will say at some point it gets cumbersome and difficult to work without an EHR. So that's one that I would recommend going ahead and almost lumping it into that first set of things you need. That would be like the very next step. It does, if you've got the right EHR, it definitely makes life a lot easier. The program that I use really simplifies my life in how automated everything is. It does, like, simple scheduling. It sends the patients the form, it confirms, it does the billing, the insurance, the notes, all the things. And it's relatively inexpensive. And so for my time or the cost of an assistant, having the EHR set up and streamlined really makes a huge difference. So I would definitely recommend that at some point, but it's definitely not something that needs to slow you down a ton or like delay your start.
Yeah, and um, the EHR I know is something that people really get stuck on that point in addition to the things we just talked about. And it's so true. People don't realize that EHR is not a legal requirement. So
Right.
HIPAA, yes, but outside of HIPAA,
Yeah, you
you
can
don't
do it
have
however
to
you want.
have, yeah, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to be, an EHR or practice management tool. Like, I mean, it can have different elements of it. And the reality is, and Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reality is you're probably going to change at some point along the way. What you start with probably isn't going to be what you finish with. And so getting stuck on that point is it's holding you back unnecessarily. Like, just dive in with something that's HIPAA compliant. Talk to Catherine about, the recommendations that she has. But the most important thing is just to get started. Don't get stuck there, because that is not what's going to make or break your success being a practice owner, being your own clinical practice owner. Being successful is not going to be related to your EHR. Like, be HIPAA compliant, right? Like, do everything legally, but you don't need to get stuck on that point. Like, pick one, move forward, or just be HIPAA compliant and keep it simple and move forward and figure it out after the fact. So I think that's a really important point to call out. So why do you recommend starting simple with that simple list we talked about? This is a matter of a couple of hours of time investment, a few $100s. Maybe we're not getting into like tens of thousands of dollars. And we're talking right now, we're talking a lot about telemedicine. If you're opening up a physical practice, we can touch on that a little bit more. It can take a little bit longer, but again, it doesn't need to take that much longer, even with a physical location. So why do you recommend keeping things simple, even with a physical location, even if you're not doing remote telemedicine, for people that are getting started and starting their own clinical practice?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think simplicity in and of itself is a good thing. It allows you to really perfect what you're doing, refine what you're doing, get really good at those handful of things that you need. So if you've got, the bare minimum that we talked about, and then you want to add in, the next step is maybe add in an EHR, which is a great tool. Then you've got all that other stuff done. You can really focus on honing in that EHR and getting it done well. And then if you want to add in like billing insurances, once you've got your EHR set and ready to go, then you can add in that next level of like, okay, now I'm really going to go all in, focus on this billing and insurance and learn it really well. Or maybe it's your website. You don't have to have one, but like maybe you put up a one-page website just to get started or listed in a directory like Psychology Today. Then you can kind of like, once you've got all these other pieces, then if you want to focus on the website and really build it out more, you can do that. But I think that focus can be really huge, to like allow you to perfect as much as you can and then move on to the second thing. So just for the efficiency that it offers is huge. I think the second reason that I really recommend starting this way is that it gets you these quick wins. The sooner you can, be moving to seeing patients and getting a little bit of income, it really keeps you motivated. That little bit of income that you get from those first few patients can fund the EHR or the website without you really having to like dig into your own pockets and get into this like anxiety provoking situation that nobody wants to be in. The third reason I think it's so huge is that just for viability and longevity, if we keep our overhead low and we keep your energy output low, then you can really better sustain over those first few months, or even years where the income is lower. Like we know eventually, our services are needed, and they can be profitable, but we really what I don't want to have happen is people put themselves in a situation where like, oh my goodness, like I've spent so much money, I can't keep doing this before they've gotten, I think the Small Business Administration says 2 years for most small businesses to be profitable. Now, again, hopefully because our services are in demand and higher costs, we're not taking that long. But hypothetically, if it did take you 2 years, like, could you hold out? Because then it just grows from there, you know? So we really want to be able to weather any storms and hang in there. I think the fourth reason, and Casey, you kind of hit on this, is that if you're starting simple, you can really see what's working and what's not, and then adjust. You know, like I think your point was to the EHR. You're probably not going to keep the same EHR through the entirety of your practice journey. So we don't want to sink time, money, effort into setting up and perfecting this EHR before we even have a patient. I know for me, like my workflows are very different than I thought they would have been. So if I had spent so much time perfecting these workflows in a computer system, and then needed to shift, it would have been a waste. So if we really start small and simple, we can adjust and grow flexibly. And then I think the last or another point is the freedom. Like if you keep things kind of lean and a little scrappy at first, you can really pivot and adjust to whatever's going on. You've not really like built this huge machine that's going in a direction that you may or may not want it to. So you can adjust and pivot and change if your life changes, or again, if you're new to business ownership or practice ownership, you may decide that like, man, I really thought I was going to love this part about it, and really I love something else about it, and that's fine. You can adjust that way. I really thought I would love eventually to like get an office and like have a face-to-face interactions with patients, and I really don't. So I'm glad I didn't like commit to a 3-year lease before I'd like really experienced the day-to-day, the workflow of being an owner.
Yeah, those are great points. And I just want to reiterate so much that the mistake that most people make when they're thinking about starting a clinical practice, or thinking about starting a business, which is a lot of what I do, and I work with clients as well, it's a similar process, is number one, they get stuck in overwhelm. Number two, they don't know what order to do things in. And number three, they feel alone. And so they start doing things out of sequence and trying to tackle everything all at the same time. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people get into when they're starting clinical practice or starting a business, really, in keeping it simple and going through the steps that you talked about, Catherine, or even like the framework that you have in practice building blueprint and the programs that you develop that goes from step one, setting the goals, the forecast, is the business viable? Step two, what are we looking at for, licensing, regulatory? And then we're getting into some of the marketing elements, because, you can have the best clinical practice concept in the world. If we don't have patients, we don't have a business, right? And so you walk people exactly through that program, through that process, step by step. And I think what happens with so many people starting a clinical practice or starting a business is they try and take on so many things, then it becomes overwhelming, scary, intimidating, or start doing things in not necessarily the right order. Before you know it, you're wasted time, you've wasted money, you're not where you want to be when you want to be there. And so I think these points that you brought up tonight were really perfect. To keep it simple is the key when you get started, whether it's a physical practice or it's telemedicine. Keeping it simple, keeping it lean on your time investment, on your financial investment, and doing it in the right order is really key and really critical. And then you're going to add on and layer on. That's how business works. You're constantly adding and layering as you grow. So I think this was really fantastic, Catherine.